Water and Sanitation Minister Nomvula Mokonyane today met Gauteng municipalities on the implementation of water restrictions in the province. The most affected municipalities are Johannesburg, Tshwane and Ekurhuleni. Joining us to discuss possibly tighter restrictions or better enforcement, the minister's spokesperson Nomvula Mokonyane. Thank you for joining us. Water supply, the cuts in Gauteng were meant to be by 15%. So that goal hasn't changed. What was today all about?
Well, on the 12th of August 2016, the Minister gazetted water restrictions that were to be applicable to the integrated Vaal River system. Now, that particular system is a system that consists of 14 dams, and as we speak currently, it's sitting at a level average of 51.8%. Now, since when the restrictions were implemented by the municipalities on the 6th of September, what we have realized is that we have not been able to achieve the 15% goal, which we had requested our consumers and especially the citizens to start using water responsibly, to start saving and to start pushing back more water into the system. Now, the reality is, from our observations, and if you look at the results we got yesterday, which was the 3rd of October, we've only been able to save 2.7%. Now, that is a far cry from the 15% that we have required and had requested that our citizens be able to save. So one of the discussions the Minister had today with the municipalities in Gauteng was about devising means and ways of how we then begin to push forward so that our citizens and our consumers understand the importance of us getting back 15% into the system.
So basically you ask consumers themselves to self-regulate, not to water their gardens between 6 and 6, things like that, and nobody's listening.
Well, that's what you can say. Essentially, people have not responded, and we again making the point that people need to come to the party, because ultimately, if we do not come to the party, the consequences will be there for all to bear. And what we are trying to avoid is to find ourselves in a situation where we would have to stop pumping water through the system, and because that particular situation would actually lead to some sort of a collapse within the Vaal River system, and we would not want to experience that currently. So what the Minister has said today, and which is the important point to make, is that citizens need to start using water wisely. We need to start monitoring our water use patterns. The issue of 15% restrictions is critical, because then it allows us to be able to save up water in the Vaal River system, but also allows us to build up our reserves, which we currently have in place as an added measure. But we would not want to tap into our reserves unnecessarily. We would want citizens to first come to the party, so that as and when we have to tap into our reserves, we have also seen a response from citizens, and we have been able to pump more water into the system. Now, one of the drastic elements that we've then had to introduce as of today is that Rand Water, as a distributor, would now cut supply to the municipalities by 15%. So it is no longer up to the consumers only to start reducing their use for us to meet the 15%, but municipalities will now start receiving 15% less water into their system. So they now need to start regulating and rationing what portions of that water they distribute across their suburbs and to their consumers.
What does that mean for a Joburg resident? When I open my tap, is there going to be less water pressure? How do you ration?
Well, the pressure may be different, but I think importantly, when you open the tap, open it for very short periods of time. When you water your gardens, don't do so using sprinklers.
But I'm saying, how will I feel that distribution side control?
Well, the distribution side control will result in pressure being slightly different in certain areas. But again, if we start responding and start using water wisely, then our consumers may not actually feel the impact of the 15% reduction. If you consider that 40% of the water that we pump through the Rand water supply system, more especially in Johannesburg, is utilized for gardening and all those other non-human consumption elements, it then tells you that if we were to cut down on those particular issues, then we would not feel that particular impact of 15%. So it is possible, it is doable, and it can be done with little disruption to what consumers currently enjoy in as far as their water supply is concerned. However, it needs a conscious decision in every household to start regulating and looking at how we are utilizing our water and start cutting back, so that at least we can give that system benefit to gain that 15% that we require.
Okay, so the restrictions don't change. You haven't asked for anything more. You're just asking people to adhere to those restrictions. Remind me, again, don't water your garden, I know, between 6 and 6. Be careful about other things. Just run us through what you're asking for?
The restrictions as gazetted remain, so that means 15% for domestic users, 20% for irrigation users in the country, well, in the Vaal River system currently, and the Rand water supply area, and those restrictions have been enforced by the municipalities with such notifications that do not use or do not irrigate your gardens between certain hours, do not wash cars using hose pipes, etc. Do, use buckets to wash your pipes. Do not refill swimming pools, etc., so that at least we can be able to gain that water back into the system, and then the system can have the benefit of us having the buffer that we are trying to create a sustainable water supply for the Gauteng supply area.
Do economic sanctions ever work when you're charging more to people who are using more water? I guess for rich households, it's not a big portion of their spend either way.
Well, the point the minister has made is that, in fact, the incentive, the tariffs, whilst you may look at them as a form of penalty, they can also present an opportunity as an incentive. Now, the incentive would be that if people start using water wisely and start using water responsibly, then obviously we don't need to add the tariff that we would require to add currently with the water restrictions that have been implemented. So the biggest point... Is
there a change to tariffs today?
There's no change to the tariffs. The tariff structures remain the same. What was introduced by the municipality in as far as water restriction tariffs still remain. However, the point we're making is that citizens must not look at the tariffs negatively. They should also look at the incentive aspect of the tariffs, that if you use water wisely and use less water, then you are not affected by the tariffs that have been implemented.
You could be affected by lower pressure. You mentioned that could have dangers when you turn off water and then pipes burst and things like that. Is that a problem?
Unfortunately, water is not like electricity. So you don't switch off a switch and switch it back on and instantly you've got water. Unfortunately, water, we need to pump water through our reservoirs and through the system. And what that does is that in some areas it may take hours for those areas to get reconnected onto the system and to start receiving water again, especially the high-lying areas in some of the supply areas that we are dealing with. So we would not want to get to a stage where we must start using what some would want to call water shedding. But what we are requesting is that let's start saving the water, so that even with the 15% reduction we would do, the consumer would not necessarily feel it. However, if we are forced to, then the consumer would feel it in the sense that the pressure would start declining, and then we would have to start looking at the various other options that would lead potentially to a collapse of the system, which we are trying to avoid at all
instances. So this is a real appeal to consumers. We have to end up, but very quickly, do you see an end in sight, or is this indefinite?
Well, generally, as Gautengers, we'll have to change our water use patterns. It cannot be business as usual. We are a water-scarce country and a province. As you would know, Gauteng relies on water from as far as Lesotho and KwaZulu-Natal to sustain its supply. So it cannot be business as usual going forward. However, it can be done if we all adjust our water use patterns. We become innovative, we adapt to the realities of climate change, and we use water more wisely and responsibly. We can still receive water in the same rations we are receiving it currently, but we just need to change our water use patterns to ensure that the system has more water for all of us to have.
All right, thank you for your time this evening. A spokesperson for Water and Sanitation, Nomvula Mokonyane.